Welcome back, if you're back. My last video, putting the switch in itself, ran much longer than I actually expected or hoped. So I've gone ahead and stopped with that for a minute. The switch is screwed into the Saber. You can see, hopefully you can get an angle to see inside there how the switch is in. One thing I'm going to do again, as I demonstrated before, take my little button cell battery. Don't have to. And bingo, my switch does still light up, so I have not damaged any of my wires putting them in. Now it comes time to do this, the circuit card. One thing that's going to happen here, as we can see, we've got my MLS lighting unit, and it's got its resistor as originally wired by Ultrasabers. It's pretty good connected. But what's going to happen here, now I've got this battery pack, I've got all this extra lead on here. I don't want this much. I don't even want this much to where this heat shrink is. That helps protect it a little bit. It doesn't need to be that much. So I'm going to cut off some of that and split those wires, because what's going to happen is I'm going to just make a loop here that's going to come right back down here to where I'm going to put that card. So I don't want 3 inches of wire coming out of my battery housing necessarily. So I need my knife, take my X-Acto knife, make a little slit in the heat shrink, heat wrap that's on there that keeps those wires in. Score that just a little bit. Once it's got the cut, get a grip, I can peel it. It'll continue along the cut until it gets down where I want it. And then just take out my nipper tool. This is like a extra fine cutter. Cuts wire ends, connection. Get them out of the jewelry section at some places. They're used for clipping the jewelry wire. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to clip these wires off of the battery. There we go. That's all I want on the battery. This little red connection point, that was just where they connected it. I don't need that part anymore. I am going to have to add wire onto their original here. Looks like my ground wire probably has enough to get back through the Saber. I'll probably be able to reuse that portion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to strip a little bit of this wire that they've got in there on this red side. There we go. And they're using a relatively heavy gauge, so I'll get something a little heavier than that 30 gauge I was using for the rest of the Saber. This here's a 26 from the Custom Saber Shop. That's plenty. I have some heavier. Let's see, 26. Here's some 22. That's the heaviest I've got for right now, except for some 18 gauge automotive wire. Was used for a very, very specialty type of saber build. It was a stunt saber. My daughter specifically wanted it for heavy combat. We use that wire in there just to make sure nothing's going to come apart. That is not breaking under regular dueling conditions. So I'm going to go ahead and use this 22 on here. I'll do twist these together a little bit way, whichever. Hook them up into the helping hand so it stays together. That just makes it easier, not a critical step. That's the helping hands you don't have to have. They help a lot. They make it nice. And then, of course, the wires are together. Some people like to pre-tin. I don't like pre-tinning on wire because then I can't twist it the way I want to. And I am so out of view right now. Sorry about that. You can see my connections right here. Hopefully you can see it. Add a little heat. Add a little solder. Get the solder to soak into all the wire connection. pull the solder out, iron out, let it cool, undo the clips. Bingo, got a connection. Okay, that is in the power wire. That is one location where it is critical to get a good insulation cover over it. So I'm going to go ahead and use a good length piece of heat shrink. Make sure I'm not going to shrink in on either end, off of either end. Leave anything exposed on there. It's the ground side. It's less concerning, but it's still, you want to make sure everything's covered. Keep it nice and even in there. Grab the heat. May not have a heat gun like this. Most of this heat shrink will work with a hair dryer. A lot more complicated, takes a lot more patience. A lot of people hold a lighter right up close under it and do that. The lighter actually works really good. You got to be a little bit careful not to do it too long, or you can burn either your heat shrink or your regular insulation. And then just for a little bit of wire management up on the inside of here, I'm going to go ahead and twist these two leads together, because there's no other reason for them not to be. Doesn't hurt anything if they are. If you're using some sound cards that are more sensitive to interference, it may be wise to have wires twisted together in there to prevent like feedback. And then now we got those connected. You're going to just drop the end in there. Make sure you guide the wires beside the switch that's already in there. Oops. Should go fairly easy. It's a straight interior saber. Just want to make sure they're not hanging up. Grab the wire. You can gently pull on it. Drop the LED in. Pull it out. Where's my other? Okay, so this side over here is all my switch wires. This side over here is my power and my ground from the saber itself. Okay, for the main light, the main LED. Now, with that main LED back up in there now and dropped in there where it's supposed to be, that MLS unit, I'm going to go ahead and put my emitter on, because what's that going to do is it's going to lock my LED, being an MLS unit, it's going to lock my LED into place and allow me to work on this without having to worry about things falling apart. Because if that falls out, it doesn't necessarily hurt anything, but it makes it all inconvenient when it pulls the wires back in out of my hands. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and lock down my emitter real quick. Quick, easy thing. Not necessary, but does help simplify the task at hand. Alright, now we've got this. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to start off with my main LED leads. Yeah, I put on a little extra on the red wire there, so I'm going to snip that off the same size as my ground, because they are very close together on this little circuit card. I'm going to go strip these, just the very end off of it. Just barely need to expose enough wire to solder on is what it needs. Okay, don't need too much. Need enough to make a good strong connection. All right, now I like to solder mine from the front of the board to the back, partly so I can read my labels, partly because of the way I'll end up mounting this. Gives the wire a little more play. So I have a volts and a ground, and these both go to my LED. So this LED voltage one is going to go into one of my V out holes over here on the back of the card. Clearly labeled right over here. Camera doesn't want to focus on it right now. Let's see if I can get it. My camera kind of sucks. Yeah, camera doesn't want to focus. But anyway, it's clearly marked on the board. So I'm going to stick that wire through my hole. Some people say it's better to lay it on top of the hole. is not necessarily better. It can be easier depending on how your saber is assembled, how you prefer to have it look in there. Assembling it across the hole can have some advantage as far as like putting it where you want it, making it look a certain way, making it fit a certain way. Can make your wire management easier. There's lots of room in this Ultrasaber. I have no need to be worried about how this thing is actually mounted in there. It will fit whichever way I want to turn it. So just takes a little bit of, because it's now in the saber body, my leads aren't particularly long. It does take a little bit of work and attention to detail to make sure you've got your saber positioned so that it will hold up in there. Now take the soldering iron, and I'm just gonna, as quickly as I can, get some heat in there, get some solder in there, get that solder monitor melted into the hole and into the wire. I'm going to take a look, check my connection. I've got solder built up all over the contact on the board, solder all over the wire. This is something I want to show you. See if I can get a focus in here. And there we go. It's about as focused as I can get it. But you can see my connection kinda. I'll take some pictures later to help make it better. Alright, so that one's on there. Next one I'm going to do is the ground. On this card, there's a ground on both sides, or there's two grounds on both sides right next to the two voltages. There's a volts in and a volts in on a volts out on each side, and a ground in, or well, just 4 grounds. They're all grounds. Ground is ground pretty much when you're doing these circuit cards, unless it specifically states otherwise. Since these ones are all labeled as ground, they're all the same. Since this is powering, or since this circuit is all the main LED, I am going to take this particular ground set to be, I'm going to set this up with that ground being in the closest one to what I'm actually working on, to the other lead, to the where my volts went in. Doesn't have to be that one, could be any which one. That's the way I like to do it. So that's the way I do it on my sabers. Oh, sorry, I'm having a little fun, challenging time getting things aligned just the way I want. Some of that's general challenge because the parts are small. Some of them is just because I'm kind of picky and I want it my way. Actually, let's do here. There we go. Now it's in there. Grab my wire. Apply some heat. Apply some solder. Get my little bubble. Let go of the board. Let go of the wire. And it's in there, nice and solid. Very good, nothing moving. Okay, now once I get the wires to the other side with the battery pack, this should fire up. Before I do that, however, I'm going to go ahead and continue on with where I'm going here. And I'm going to trim my accent LED wires off for my switch, my lighted switch. Go ahead and strip that. These wires are finer, So I'm gonna all right. My wires are tangling themselves. All right. Now I'm gonna go ahead and hold those up both. I'm gonna do a little something extra because these ones are very, very fine. Remember, I used very small gauge wire on that because it does not require anything bigger. Just to run that switch or that Xen LED. Re-wet my sponge. I'm wiping off the tip of my soldering iron again here. Oops, a little too much water. It's on my table, won't hurt. All right, now, because they're so fine, and it can be helpful in general, I'm going to go ahead and do what they call pre-tinning, where I'm adding just a little bit of solder into the wire prior to connecting it to anything. All that does, make sure there's some solder sitting there ready, so when I start to add more, it gets in there and sticks a little easier. Again, it's not a 100% necessary thing. It is a helpful thing. It when using these little circuit cards, it actually does make it easier to get your wire through the hole, as the wire is now solid on that end, instead of having little connectors that fray, little pieces that fray away from it. Because of the way I've put this up there, my wire's poking through there just from having it in the clip, in the single clip. Go ahead and add my solder, make my little bubble, and now my switch's LED is connected to that ground. Go ahead and run power into the other voltage out. Now this, if I wanted to do differently, I could have twisted these wires together and put them both into the same V out. Could have put them into the same ground. I could have done combinations to where I have 2 wires in the ground, 1 wire in the voltage. There's no reason to play with that. I know this is all of the circuit that I have, so I went ahead and put them all in the same one all the way around. All in separate ones all the way around. I used both my volts outs and both of my grounds on that side to connect that circuit card to. Nothing wrong with either way, just a matter of personal preference how one decides to do it. Now comes the time for my battery pack. So I've left about 2 inches of wire here. Could do more, could do less, doesn't matter. This application, it's a very short jump because of where I'm going to put the card. Now, because these are going into the holes, I'm also going to go ahead and pre-tin these battery leads. Little heat, little solder, get it in there. You'll observe, if you haven't soldered before, you may want to practice on some wire. You'll observe when the solder is going into your wire, it actually soaks in. It looks like it's running right up there, almost like when you soak up water with a paper towel. The water seems to go up or go along into the paper towel almost of its own accord. It's the same thing. It's a scientific term, or scientific happening known as capillary action, and that's where something really fine allows something else to flow within it, up or down or any direction, just based on that movement. So now I've stuck my ground and my volts from the batteries into the VN card on the board, or the VN holes on the board, and the ground hole, and I'm just going to apply my heat, apply my solder, try to get it to stick in here, make my bubble. Alright, there we go. And you'll notice that one looks, that's a bad connection. We'll fix that. Now, There we go. Had a bad connection, went ahead and fixed it. Now, interestingly enough, my switch is not yet connected to the circuit card. I have these two leads still hanging here. They just got to go into these two little switch buttons. This board has a built-in switch. So now if I turn it, you can see my Saber light up. Also light up the auxiliary light switch here on my Saber. So I can turn it on and off. This confirms to me everything is functioning. I connect up those other two leads. My light should work, or my Saber should work just perfectly from the switch that I've installed. Twist these leads up a little bit. There we go. Again, this stuff won't stay twisted well. I'm going to shorten them up to a similar length to what I've got my battery leads, because they're going to about the same spot on the board. Clip, clip. Go ahead and oops, and I just clipped it a little shorter because I overdid it with my wire cutter. There we go. Now I got some end on both. I'm going to go ahead and set these up here. Going to pre-tin those two, because again, this is that extra fine. This is that 30 gauge wire. Don't need bigger for this application, but it's really small stuff. Apply heat, apply solder, let it soak in and cool. There we go. Got a straggler. That's okay. Now, shake that off. Wash that. Do the same thing I did here with my battery leads. Kind of set them through, set these switch leads through the holes I want them in. And again, it's just as you'll see the drawing of the switch. It's just like a schematic drawing for a switch on the board, because this it does not matter at all which side of this wire is in which hole. Does not. There we go. Got my wires in the holes. Add some heat, add some solder, make my bubble, let it cool, disconnect everything. Bingo, wires are connected. Alright, now here's the real test. Hey, looky there, Saber lit up. Saber lit up all on its own. We got our operations light going on the little switchboard. Everything is ready to go. Now, I'm going to trim. This part's fun. Nah, this is easy. Trim off these wires just a little bit on the back here. The wire tips that came through as I soldered, and make everything kind of a little bit flatter. And just smooths it up a bit. There we go. That's all done. Now I am turn on my glue gun. I should have done that a while ago. What I think I want to do with this, just keep things nice and neat. Just give this wire a little twist over on itself. And I'm going to go ahead and attach this circuit card right over here to the side of the battery pack when I'm done. I think that'll be the easiest. Should still slide up in there fairly easy. Well, doesn't matter. Actually, there's all kinds of ways to attach this. Doesn't matter. Yeah, the wires are going to interfere if I try to do it that way. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do a little change of plans here. Because I've made a good strong attachment with everything, battery pack, I've done this mostly on AAA or AA battery packs when I've done it before. So, or I've done a complete system rewire and done it with single 18650s. So I'm not going to glue this to the battery pack as I originally was planning to. What I'm going to do is actually just apply some electrical tape over the switch itself to prevent it's getting up against anything on the interior of the saber there, and also to give a little added reinforcement to the wire connections, because that's what's going to hold it. I'm going to put this on. A lot of the saber community complains about the use of electrical tape. When done appropriately, there's nothing wrong with it. I'm not using it to hold anything together. I'm using it to give a little extra reinforcement and a little additional protection to my circuit switch. Wrap it up real good here. Wrap it up real good. And then double check. Still works from the interior switch. Still works from the exterior switch, and that is complete. And carefully feed this up in there. Get a little extra on the wires. I could try to twist those together here on the inside, and I can also, now that that's taped, take another little bit of tape over the outside, so I lay those wires flat to the back a little more. That'll just make it easier to guide my battery pack in and out as I use this saber in the future. This part's not necessary again, but will simplify things for me, so I go ahead and do it. Because you can see 3 AAAs, I will end up changing batteries as they die and as more come in. Stuff it back in there, put the pommel on, and bingo, there we go. Light up stunt Ultrasaber with 12mm, nice looking 12mm AV switch, using the bezeled ring for MHS V2 from the Custom Saber shop on the Ultrasabers Bane. Hope everybody enjoyed. Sorry I ran so long.